Hello, everyone. My name is Chintan Vaishnav, and over the next 20 minutes, me and my colleagues, Soumya and Nikhil, will be presenting to you our work, Machine in the Loop, Personalizing Farm Advisory for Smallholder Farmers using Artificial Intelligence. This work is done with our collaborators in mechanical engineering, and it involves both technology and systems. And it raises this meta question that what is actionable information for a resource poor farmer? Is it the same information that you and I consume via various channels like Google and Facebook and YouTube and so on? Or is it different? We've done this work over the past 6 years, specifically in the context of soil nutrient management for smallholder farmers. The problem we're talking about is the following, that worldwide there are some 480 million smallholder farmers who own less than 2 hectares of land and are critical to global food security. But their crop yields are typically 50 to 200% below the potential yields of the crops that they are growing because they neither have access to uh, soil testing to know what the nutrient levels are of their soil, nor are they able to act upon the farm advisory that they receive because of the large information gaps. Our research so far has shown us that bridging these information gaps by providing personalized farm advisory can enable these smallholder farmers to reduce yield gaps and increase their productivity. And the most effective way of doing so in the current scenario is to use AI-enabled machines that sit in the loop between a smallholder farmer and the extension provider and offer such personalization, thereby strengthening both sides and not aiming to replace either. The methodology we have followed in this work so far has been to build and refine causal hypotheses with deeper dives that use other field research methods, such as randomized controlled trials or conjoint analysis. And all along, we have used assortments of human-centered design methods to work in the farms alongside farmers to do this research. The appropriate use of fertilizer by a farmer typically depends upon two factors. The first one is how specific is the advisory to the farmer's situation. And second is how capable is the farmer of acting upon what is being advised. From these two stem the two fundamental hypotheses used by the agricultural extension. The first one is that if you can divide a farming community into appropriate typological clusters, such as based on their land holding, their education, and so on, the specificity of the farm advisory goes up, and therefore its ability to satisfy farmers' preferences goes up. Um, Now, this is a balancing structure because as you disaggregate farmers into smaller and smaller groups, there is less and less room for such typology-based disaggregation. Now, how does such disaggregation affect the specificity of the recommendation or its ability to satisfy a farmer's preference is shown in this chart on the right-hand side, where what we see is that with very small number of clusters, say about 5, it is believed, one can satisfy a very high degree of farmers' preferences. The second hypothesis is that as more and more farmers come in contact with agricultural extension and get trained, their ability to act upon recommendation goes higher. Now, this obviously creates more demand for such good agricultural extension, and that induces another balancing structure because the resources are finite and the amount of extension resources per farmer reaches a floor below which the extension becomes defunct. So this also is a balancing structure which we can call the limits to extension. Now, how does the contact with extension improve farmers' ability to act upon recommendation is shown in this graph on the top left corner, where what we see is that uh, uh, the farmer's ability to act upon recommendation grows linearly with extension contact. But then there's often an assumption that because farmers have their own word of mouth, that relates that their actual ability may be even higher in practice. Now, this raises the following questions that we must investigate. The first one is that how much typological clustering is necessary for uh, smallholder resource limited farmers? Second, what does actionability mean for smallholder farmers and under what conditions is their actionability maximized? So we will start with this second question about actionability with Soumya and her field experiment.
Our first field experiment was designed to elucidate the factors that affect actionability of soil health advisory in a resource-poor setting. We approached this by designing a randomized controlled trial with farmers in an entire village. The idea of using the entire population of the village was to expose the diversity within a community that is currently ignored by the incumbent soil health advisory system. Now, in order for any experimental findings to be generalizable in the Indian context, it was essential that we choose to study a population that was on average representative of an Indian village. To do this, we compared key statistics from the Indian census of a set of 6 candidate villages in our area of operation. We selected Balrawad village in North Karnataka, in large part for the close match in literacy rates to the state and national averages. As a first step, demographics were manually collected for each of the 246 households that participated in the study. This information was used to perform stratified sampling by typology in each of the 9 test groups. The participating households were first divided into 3 test groups for the experiment, a control and 2 treatment groups. The control group were provided with a basic soil health recommendation modeled on the current format provided by government soil testing labs in India. These reports just state the soil test result and what remedial action to take. Treatment 1 were given the same, augmented with additional information on how to carry out the specific fertilizer treatments recommended. Treatment 2 were provided with the same as treatment 1, further augmented with the rationale behind the recommendation, that is, why it was important to carry out the advised action. Each of the 3 test groups was further divided into 3 experimental environments. These dictated the manner in which the farmer interacted with the recommendation. Farmers were asked to engage with the soil health recommendation either on their own, with the help of their social network, that is, their family, friends, and neighbors, or with the help of an experienced field agent. In this way, 9 subgroups were created. And finally, each was asked to answer a number of survey questions related to the recommendations of their report. Our hypothesis was that the actionability of a soil health recommendation is based on some combination of the farmer's ability to interpret, afford, and acquire the necessary materials. Using the results from the RCT, we were able to construct a numerical index of actionability as a weighted sum of these components. Some of the key findings from this experimental framework are as follows. The first is related to the importance of the farmer's social network. We found that group-based advisory dissemination, which mirrors the natural social order of these communities, will allow for maximal user engagement with the system. Second, more is not always better. We found that too much information can actually be detrimental to a user's ability to interpret and benefit from the soil health advisory. And finally, personalizing advice based on demographic typology is one of the most effective ways to improve actionability, and this can be achieved algorithmically. This third point forms the basis of our second field experiment that Nikhil will now talk about.
The purpose of our second field experiment is to explore the limits to typological clustering. We specifically wanted to understand how effective personalizing advice based on demographic typology can be as far as adoption is concerned. The method we use is conjoint analysis. a method that is often used by market researchers to understand how consumers value trade-offs in a product. For our specific purpose, we adapted the method in the form of a survey. As a location for our experiment, we chose Nandurbar district in the Indian state of Maharashtra. We had 60 participants from 6 villages, all within the same agroecological region and growing the same crops. We collected demographic information from the participants beforehand and made sure that they belonged to the same demographic typology. This meant that all our participants had a landholding size of less than 2 hectares and had a similar education level. For the conjoint part of the experiment, we showed each farmer a set of cards, with each card containing 2 options of soil health advice that differed in terms of actionability. For example, a card with an affordable nutrient management option on one side versus an expensive one on the other. In order to answer the question, the farmer had to choose which of the 2 options he or she preferred. Once we gathered data from all the participants, we proceeded to carry out the analysis. As a first step of the analysis, we used a discrete choice model to estimate individual preferences for the underlying actionability attributes. In this way, we were able to quantify how much each individual farmer valued the underlying attribute. For the second part of the analysis, we used a hierarchical clustering technique to find groups of farmers with similar preferences. The analysis revealed some interesting results. The first key finding is that despite all our participants belonging to the same demographic typology, we were able to find 10 distinct clusters on the basis of their preferences. The graph on the left depicts distribution of farmers across the clusters. When we went a step further and looked for correlation between cluster membership and demographic characteristics, we found that there was none. When we plotted the distribution of demographic characteristics among farmers within each cluster, we found that no single demographic factor stands out as an explanation for similarity in preferences. As we can see from the graph on the right, the histogram of distribution of demographic parameters looks similar across clusters. The major conclusion from the analysis is that differences in soil health preferences that we observe are not a result of difference in demographics, but probably of behavior. Therefore, if we were to develop an algorithm in order to personalize soil health advice, we need to go beyond demographic typology in order to increase the likelihood of adoption.
Let us now incorporate what we learned from these experiments into the basic causal structures that we started with. What you see in red here is the addition to the original causal structure. The first thing that we learned was that the actionability has 3 components: the ability to interpret, access, and afford what is being recommended. And the contact with agricultural extension really influences the interpretation the most. We also learned that if social network can be used effectively, farmers do benefit a great deal, as was originally hypothesized. Now, the most important learning perhaps is from the fact that the specificity of the advisory itself uh, may divide into 2 types of specificity. The behavioral specificity, which is about how close is what is being advised to a given farmer's preference. And the scientific specificity is about how accurate is the advisory from the perspective of the underlying agronomic condition of the farm about which this advice is. This second factor contributes a third component to appropriate fertilizer use, which is the potency of the farmer advisory, which is what we will see in the next slide. So let's look at how the disaggregation affects the scientific and the behavioral specificity of the recommendation. For the behavioral specificity, we found from our experiments that the farmer preferences, even in a single typological cluster, has a great deal of diversity, or in other words, has a long tail. And this long tail is what a machine in the middle may be able to cater to. For scientific specificity, we found that the crop response curves that currently undergird the fertilizer recommendation, these are the curves that show how much input of fertilizer will yield, will give how much yield for a given crop, is completely outdated because it's based on 20 to 30-year-old experiments, which are very difficult and expensive to reproduce. And that's where we also thought maybe a machine in the middle could help. So let's look at what such a machine in the loop does. So we can now augment the causal structure that we have so far with what a machine in the loop can add to such a structure. These additions are shown in blue. First of all, such a machine can provide a much greater fertilizer choice to the farmer, including organic and inorganic, and let them compare these choices on the basis of cost, productivity gains, and environmental impact for each choice. In turn, such a choice improves the behavioral specificity on one hand, and it also improves the affordability because there's more choices to pick from. The machine can also let farmer know where these fertilizers are available, thereby improving the ability to access what is being recommended. All of this together improves the appropriate use of fertilizers, which, as the machine records, one has the idea of uh, who are the farmers who have similar predicament and choices, and how to connect a given farmer to the most appropriate social network so that their ability to interpret recommendations goes up. Uh, Also, at the end of the season, such a machine can record the fertilizers used as well as the yields obtained, thereby allowing us to reconstruct the crop response curves in a crowdsourced fashion and thereby improving the scientific specificity, which is currently so outdated, in a crowdsourced, low-cost manner. So these are the hypotheses that we have embedded into a product called MITTI, which stands for soil in Hindi, which is an open digital soil nutrient management platform for use by both public as well as private extension. This is a mobile-based solution that interposes a lab or the extension and the farmer. And as compared to the paper-based solution, the soil health card that is being used today, um, it produces four areas of benefit. First, uh, MITTI provides a recommendation within minutes after the soil test is performed as compared to up to 6 months or more that the soil health card today takes. Second, the use of iconography in MITTI improves the interpretation of the choices that are being offered to the farmer as compared to the 10% of farmers being able to interpret what is being said on the soil health card. Third, by offering multiple fertilization choices, it improves the ability to act upon recommendation. And finally, and most importantly, it offers a product architecture that delivers recommendations with greater and greater site specificity as more and more farmers come on board this platform and start using the solution. This research was possible because of the generosity of these organizations that either funded or provided on the ground support for this work. Today, we continue to work with the government of Maharashtra to augment their capacity to serve smallholder farmers in large numbers. Thank you very much for your attention. We're ready for your questions.